the fated silent town of Blackwood Creek, a homeless little girl lived like a shadow. One cold night she discovered a man dying in a dark alley. With no one else to care, she ran to find help, giving up her most treasured necklace in exchange for a single 911 call. What she didn't know was that the man she had just saved would change her life forever. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. The air in Blackwood Creek hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke, a perpetual quiet broken only by the whisper of the wind through skeletal trees. It was a town that had seen better days, its once bustling lumber mills now silent hulks, leaving behind a landscape of forgotten dreams and weathered faces. In this place, where most people were just trying to get by, it was easy for some to disappear into the cracks. Among them was a small girl, no older than 7, who moved through the narrow streets like a phantom. Her name was Lily. She was thin, almost ethereal, with dark, tangled hair that seemed to absorb the meager sunlight. Her clothes, patched and oversized, suggested a life lived on the fringes, and her bare feet, calloused and dirty, were a testament to countless miles walked on cold pavement. Lily didn't speak. Not to the stern storekeepers who shooed her away, nor to the hurried parents pulling their children closer as she passed. Her silence wasn't born of shyness, but of something deeper, a quiet resignation that had settled into her bones. People noticed the shape of her, the small frame darting between storefronts and alleyways, but they rarely saw her. To most, she was just another shadow, a transient detail in the town's fading tapestry. Her most prized possession was a small, ornate silver locket nestled deep within the worn canvas bag she carried everywhere. It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a memory, a final gift from Mrs. Albright, the kindly old librarian who had offered Lily quiet refuge on rainy afternoons. Mrs. Albright, with her spectacles perched on her nose and a gentle smile, had told Lily to keep it safe, to use it only for something truly important. Lily didn't fully understand what important meant, but she clung to the locket as if it were a piece of Mrs. Albright's warmth, the last tangible link to a world that had once offered her a fleeting glimpse of kindness. The late autumn evening drew in, bringing with it a biting chill that promised an early winter. Lily's stomach ached, a familiar dull throb that had become a constant companion. She hadn't eaten since the small, hard biscuit a church volunteer had given her that morning. The few coins she had managed to find had long since been spent on a bottle of water. Now, her only goal was to find a dry, sheltered spot for the night, a place where the wind wouldn't cut straight through her threadbare jacket. She eventually turned down a narrow, unlit service alley behind Peterson's Hardware, a space usually reserved for overflowing dumpsters and discarded crates. It was grimy, but the high brick walls offered a partial shield from the wind. As she picked her way through the refuse, her foot nudged something soft. She paused, her small heart quickening. It wasn't a discarded blanket or a pile of rubbish. It was a man. He lay on his side, unnaturally still, his face pale and drawn in the dim light. A low, guttural groan escaped his lips, a sound of profound distress. Lily froze, her grip tightening on the strap of her bag. She had seen people asleep in alleys before, drunks, drifters, those simply too tired to move on. But this was different. This man's hand was pressed against his chest, his body rigid, his breathing shallow and ragged. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, and a barely audible whisper escaped him. "Help, please." He didn't look like the others. His clothes, though rumpled, were made of fine material, his shoes expensive if scuffed. Lily hesitated for a moment, her mind racing through the limited options her young life had presented. She had no phone, no one to call. But the urgency in his face, the silent plea in his eyes was undeniable. She took a step closer. His skin looked waxy, his lips a pale blue. He wasn't simply resting. This was something serious. Without another thought, driven by an instinct she didn't understand, Lily turned and ran. Her small legs pumped, carrying her past the dark facades of closed shops until she reached the glowing fluorescent sign of Miller's Mart, a convenience store at the corner of Main and Elm. She burst through the automatic doors, the sudden warmth and artificial light momentarily disorienting. Behind the counter, A woman with tired eyes and a name tag reading Brenda, was engrossed in her phone. Lily rushed forward, grabbing the hem of Brenda's apron. Brenda flinched, pulling away sharply. "Hey, what do you think you're doing? Get your hands off me, kid." Her voice was sharp, laced with annoyance. "We don't allow loitering. Out!" Lily stepped back, her breathing ragged, her chest heaving from the sprint, her lips parted as if she might speak, but no sound emerged. She simply stood there, trembling, her eyes wide and pleading. "Well? What do you want, huh?" Brenda demanded, her gaze sweeping over Lily's disheveled appearance with disdain. "You hear me? I said get out!" Desperation welled up inside Lily. She plunged her hand into her canvas bag, her fingers fumbling until they closed around the smooth, cool metal of the locket. She pulled it out, holding it up with both hands, its silver surface gleaming faintly under the store lights. Brenda's eyes, which had been narrowed in irritation, widened perceptibly, her gaze fixed on the locket, a flicker of avarice crossing her face. "What? What is that?" Her tone softened, laced with a new speculative interest. "Where do you get that fancy thing?" Lily still didn't speak. She just held the locket higher, extending it towards Brenda. Brenda snatched it, her fingers closing around the cold metal. She examined it for a moment, turning it over in her palm. The craftsmanship was clearly antique, intricate. "Is someone hurt?" she asked, almost as an afterthought, her attention still primarily on the locket. Lily nodded once, a quick, desperate jerk of her head. Brenda sighed, a theatrical gesture of exasperation, but her eyes kept returning to the locket. She pulled out her cell phone. "Fine. I'll call. But don't think I'm doing this for you, kid. This better be worth it." Lily didn't wait to hear the rest. As Brenda began speaking to the dispatcher, her voice low and grudging, Lily turned and ran back out into the cold night. She didn't go back to the man. Instead, she darted behind the row of commercial dumpsters near the alley's entrance, finding a cramped space between the grimy bins and the brick wall. Hiding was safe. Hiding meant no one could yell at her, take her, or send her somewhere worse. From her vantage point, she watched the flashing blue and red lights arrive, heard the distant wail of a siren growing louder. She watched as paramedics carefully loaded the man onto a stretcher, his form still and pale. She watched the ambulance pull away, its siren fading into the night. Then, when the street was empty again, silent save for the wind, she curled into a tight ball, hugging her empty canvas bag to her chest, and tried to sleep. The locket was gone, and so was the man. She didn't know if he was alive, if her desperate act had made any difference. She only knew she had tried. That had to count for something. Across town, in the sterile quiet of a hospital room, Arthur Sterling opened his eyes. The crushing pain in his chest had subsided, replaced by a dull ache, a fading echo. But it was the confusion that struck him first. The antiseptic scent, the beige ceiling, the rhythmic beeping of a monitor beside his bed. A nurse, a woman with kind eyes and a tired smile, leaned over him, adjusting an IV drip. "You're very lucky, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice soft. "Someone called it in just in time. Another hour, maybe less." Arthur's throat was dry. "Who?" he managed, his voice a raspy whisper. I didn't leave a name." "The dispatcher didn't get one," the nurse replied, checking his chart. "Just that the call came from Miller's Mart on Main and Elm." Arthur closed his eyes again, but this time it wasn't from pain. It was something heavier, a quiet realization settling in. He had walked out into that night seeking an end to his grief, to return to the cold, empty house that had once held the laughter of his wife, Sarah, and their son, Thomas. A car accident, a sudden, brutal turn of fate, had stolen them both, leaving Arthur adrift in a sea of his own fortune and profound, debilitating loss. He hadn't expected to make it back from that alley. But someone had stopped. Someone had cared. He turned his head slowly. "I need a phone." Later that morning, Arthur stood outside Miller's Mart, a crisp, unfamiliar hospital gown still visible beneath his coat. His assistant, David, a man in his late 20s with a perpetually worried frown, hovered silently beside him. The bell above the door jingled as Arthur entered. Brenda, the same woman from the night before, was behind the counter, scrolling through something on her phone. She looked up, mildly annoyed. "We don't open for another 10 minutes. Arthur took a step closer, his gaze steady. "Did you call for an ambulance last night?" Brenda blinked, then tilted her head, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "Oh, you're that guy, the one found in the alley." She set her phone down, a defensive note entering her voice. "Yeah, that wasn't me, really. Some dirty little girl came in, grabbed my apron. I only called 'cause she gave me a valuable trinket, a silver locket." Her eyes narrowed slightly, as if expecting him to demand it back. Arthur didn't respond right away. He just stared at her, absorbing the information. His voice, when it came, was quiet, almost a whisper. "Where did she go?" Brenda shrugged. "Back into the alley, I guess. I didn't follow her. You people think I've got time to babysit every homeless kid who walks in here?" David stepped forward, his expression hardening. "Do you have security cameras?" Brendan hesitated, crossing her arms. "Why?" Arthur's voice was low, laced with an intensity that surprised even David. "Because I need to see her face." 15 minutes later, in the cramped, dust-filled back office of Miller's Mart, they watched the grainy footage. It was shaky, but clear enough. A small figure, barefoot, wild hair, ran into the frame, clutching something in her hand. She reached up, handed the locket to Brenda, and stood there, trembling. When Brenda turned to make the call, the girl slipped away, disappearing from view. Arthur leaned in, his gaze fixed on the screen. Was it? The image froze. Lily's face was small, smudged with dirt, but her eyes were wide, not empty, just profoundly afraid. And underneath that fear, Arthur saw something else, something he hadn't expected. A raw, undeniable bravery. "She saved my life," he whispered, a profound realization washing over him. David glanced at him, his brow furrowed. "What do you want to do, Mr. Sterling?" Arthur stood up, slow and steady, a new resolve firming his posture. "I want to find her." Outside, the clouds had thickened and a light drizzle began to fall, turning the pavement slick. Arthur got back into the large SUV David had driven, holding a still frame of Lily from the video on his phone. "Start with the local shelters," he instructed David, his voice firm. "Then the food banks, anywhere children might go. She's not invisible to me anymore." He didn't know her name. He didn't know if she could speak, but he remembered that look in her eyes, that moment she had reached out, not for herself, but for him. She had nothing, and still, she had given. Now, it was his turn. The rain fell harder by noon, washing the dirt into thin gray rivers along the gutters. Arthur sat in the back of the SUV, one hand pressed against his chest, not from physical pain, but from something deeper. A sensation he hadn't felt in years. Not in the hushed boardrooms of his vast company, not at the glittering fundraising galas, not even when he had signed the papers to give away half his fortune to charity. None of it had made him feel anything but a deeper sense of emptiness. But that little girl, who stood there trembling, who had handed over her only treasure just to save someone she didn't know, she had cracked something open in him, something that had been sealed shut since the day Sarah and Thomas died. "Still nothing from the shelters," David reported from the front seat, his voice tinged with frustration. "And the local school district has no record of a child matching her description." Arthur didn't respond. He kept his eyes on the street, watching every corner, every alley, as if she might suddenly appear. 2 blocks later, they passed the Blackwood Creek Community Hall. A line had already formed near the rear parking lot, people waiting patiently for food. The town didn't have much, but on Thursdays a small charity group handed out bread and canned goods. "Stop here," Arthur instructed the driver. He stepped out slowly, ignoring the umbrella David held out. His expensive wool coat absorbed the rain quickly, but he didn't care. He scanned the line person by person. Most were adults, a few mothers with younger children bundled against the cold. And then, near the very end of the line, half shielded behind an older boy who was shivering visibly, he saw her. She was smaller than he remembered, her frame swallowed by a coat that was clearly several sizes too large, likely a donation. But her eyes were the same, quiet, watchful, deeply worn. She held her canvas bag close, her fingers digging into the fabric as if it might float away if she loosened her grip. Arthur didn't move right away. He watched as the line inched forward. Lily didn't push. She didn't complain. She just waited. A silent, patient presence in a world that had forgotten her. When she finally reached the folding table, a volunteer, a woman with a kind but harried expression, asked her something. Lily didn't answer. The woman asked again, louder, gesturing towards a sign-up sheet. Lily slowly held up her hand, as if trying to explain without words. The volunteer frowned, then shook her head. "No name, no bag," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "We can't just give things out without a record." Lily looked down, her shoulders slumping almost imperceptibly. She started to turn away, her face blank, not surprised, not angry, just used to it. "Wait," Arthur said, his voice cutting through the damp air. Lily froze. The volunteer looked up, surprised, then raised an eyebrow at Arthur. "Do you know her?" Arthur nodded, stepping forward. "Yes, she's with me." The volunteer, looking confused but accepting, shrugged and handed over a small paper bag filled with bread and a can of beans. Lily took the bag with both hands, clutching it to her chest, but didn't look up. She stepped aside slowly, unsure whether to run or stay. Arthur knelt down, ignoring the sting in his knees and the cold rain seeping through his coat. "You saved me," he said quietly, his gaze steady on her face. "I remember you. I remember what you did." She clutched the bag tighter, her knuckles white. He took a deep breath, the cold air filling his lungs. "I want to repay you. Not with money, not with gifts, Lily," he said, using the name he had decided to call her, a hopeful whisper, "but with something real. A home. A place where you never have to beg again. A place where you are safe." She didn't answer. She didn't nod. But her eyes, those quiet, watchful eyes, slowly lifted to meet his. And for the first time, they didn't flinch away. Arthur extended his hand, palm open, an offering. "I won't hurt you. I won't let anyone else hurt you either." There was a long pause, the kind that made Arthur's heart beat loud enough for him to hear, thudding in his ears. Then, slowly, tentatively, Lily reached out. Not to shake his hand, not to take anything. She touched his sleeve, just a single finger, just enough to say, "I'm listening." That was all he needed. The house was quiet when they arrived. Not the kind of silence that made you feel small or unwanted, but the kind that wrapped itself around you, soft and slow, like a warm blanket at the end of a long storm. It sat at the edge of Blackwood Creek, nestled behind a line of tall, ancient oak trees, its windows glowing a gentle gold against the fading gray sky. It was Arthur's ancestral home, a place he hadn't set foot in for years, a place that had felt too empty, too full of ghosts after his loss. Now it held a different kind of quiet. Lily didn't say a word when she stepped out of the SUV. She didn't look afraid, just cautious, like a stray animal unsure if the door would close behind her the moment she crossed the threshold. Arthur didn't rush her. He walked ahead a few steps, then stopped and waited. His gait was slower than usual, still recovering from his medical scare, but steady. "It's your choice," he said over his shoulder, his voice gentle. "No one's going to make you stay." She hesitated on the paved walkway. Her canvas bag was slung tight across her shoulder, damp at the corners from the rain. The paper bag of food she had been given at the community hall was held firmly in both hands, untouched. She looked at the house, its welcoming glow, then at Arthur, his patient stillness. Then, slowly, she walked inside. Everything smelled faintly of old wood and clean soap. The floorboards creaked softly beneath her small, light steps. She passed a hallway lined with framed photos, some faded sepia tones, some newer, vibrant colors. A woman with soft, intelligent eyes. A young boy with a mischievous grin, holding a baseball glove. Arthur didn't point them out. He simply showed her the kitchen, with its large, comforting stove, the living room with a deep, inviting armchair, the bathroom with a light that flickered once when you turned it on too fast. Then he opened a door to a small room at the end of the hall. "This one's yours," he said, his voice quiet. "If you want it." There was a bed. Not a mattress on the floor, not a blanket on concrete, but a real bed, neatly made with soft blue sheets and a thick comforter. A small wooden shelf above it held a simple lamp. A modest dresser stood against one wall. A window with blue curtains looked out onto the backyard. On the pillow sat a stuffed bear, brown, with one ear slightly bent, as if it had been loved. Nothing fancy, nothing perfect, but it was hers. Lily stepped inside slowly. She didn't touch anything, not at first, she just looked. Then, with a quiet solemnity, she placed her canvas bag gently at the foot of the bed, sat down on the edge of the mattress, and folded her hands in her lap. Arthur stood in the doorway for a moment, observing her. He cleared his throat. "I'll give you some time. There's soup on the stove if you're hungry." She didn't move. That night, she ate in silence. Arthur didn't push her. He sat across the large kitchen table, sipping tea, telling her small, quiet stories about the house, about the old oak trees out back that held a swing in summer, about how the heater always groaned once at midnight before settling into a soft hum until morning. She didn't respond, but her eyes, those deep, observant eyes, followed every word. She wasn't just hearing, she was remembering. She was absorbing. Days passed. She stayed. She never spoke a sound, never uttered a single word. But she began to move through the house with less caution, less fear. She'd sit on the porch in the mornings, curled up in one of the old rocking chairs, watching the birds. She'd eat what Arthur cooked, even if she never asked for anything. She started brushing her hair again, slowly, methodically, as if she were trying to untangle more than just knots. Arthur learned her rhythms. He didn't ask her why she never spoke. He didn't ask about her mother or where she had slept before he found her. He just made sure the fridge was full, that her light switch worked, and that her sheets were warm and clean. He respected her quiet space, offering companionship without demanding it. He found himself finding solace in the routine, a gentle counterpoint to the years of his own crushing solitude. The house, once a tomb of memories, slowly, imperceptibly began to breathe again. One evening, after dinner, she walked over to the tall bookshelf in the living room. Her fingers traced the spines of various books until she settled on a worn children's book, its cover faded with age. She didn't open it. She just looked at the cover for a long time, then turned and handed it to Arthur. "You want me to read it?" he asked, his voice soft. She nodded. It was a slight, almost imperceptible movement, but it was there. He sat down on the old, comfortable couch, cleared his throat, and began to read. It was a story about a little bear who found his way home. Lily leaned her head against the armrest, her small form almost lost in the cushions. Her eyes slowly began to close. By the third page she was asleep, the soft, steady rhythm of Arthur's voice, a lullaby she had never known. He didn't stop reading when he reached the last line. He whispered, "Good night, kiddo," and sat there a little longer, holding the book in his lap. It was the first time the house had truly felt alive in years. The wind had changed by morning. It was warmer now, gentler, brushing through the open windows and carrying the scent of early spring. Damp soil, fresh grass, something hopeful. Birds chirped near the porch, and somewhere out back a squirrel chattered as it skittered across the fence. Inside the house, Lily sat at the small table by the kitchen window, her legs tucked underneath her, a spoon clinking quietly against a bowl of oatmeal. She had started eating breakfast without being asked. She would come to the table when the smell of toast or eggs filled the house, never making a sound but always there, like a quiet promise that she wasn't going to leave. Arthur sat across from her, the morning newspaper folded but unread on the table beside his coffee mug. He watched her from over the rim of the mug, noticing the small, subtle changes. She had let him wash her coat last week. Today she wore a clean sweater, a soft yellow one that used to belong to his late wife, Sarah. Lily had found it in the hall closet and, after trying it on, had hugged it to her chest like it had always been hers. It was still too big, the sleeves covering her hands, but she seemed comfortable in it. The morning was like any other, a quiet rhythm settling into their lives, until the phone rang. Arthur stood to answer it. Sterling residence. It was David, his attorney, calling about some follow-up paperwork for the trust fund Arthur had set up in Lily's name, ensuring her future. He spoke briefly, calmly, his voice low. But as he turned back toward the kitchen table, his knee gave out slightly. A sharp, familiar pain shot through his lower back. He winced, placing a hand on the wall for balance. The coffee mug slipped from his hand, shattering against the tile floor, shards of ceramic scattering across the cool surface, dark liquid spreading like an ink blot. Lily jumped to her feet. Her bowl clattered against the floor, oatmeal splashing across her bare toes. She looked at him, truly looked, and in that moment something in her cracked wide open. Her eyes, usually so guarded, filled with a sudden, raw concern. "Are you okay?" she whispered. Arthur froze. His heart thudded so hard it echoed in his ears. She had spoken. Her voice was small, rasped with disuse, like a door that hadn't opened in years, but it was clear, it was real. He stared at her, not in disbelief, but in profound awe. She stepped toward him, her small arms half raised, unsure, hesitant. You need help," she managed, her voice barely audible. He nodded slowly, tears pricking his eyes. Just a little ache, nothing to worry about." She reached for his arm. Her touch was light, careful, but full of intent. Together they walked slowly to the living room. Arthur sat down on the couch, exhaling a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. Lily stood in front of him, silent again, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. She looked down at the floor, then up, her lips parting, forming words she clearly struggled to utter, words that carried the weight of everything she had held inside. "Are you really my dad now?" she asked softly, her voice shaking. Arthur's throat tightened, a lump forming in his chest. His eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not tears of grief, but of overwhelming gratitude and love. "Only if you want me to be, Lily," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. She nodded once, then twice, her head bobbing. Her voice shook again, this time not from fear, but from something bigger, something fragile and new. "Okay, Dad." The word hung in the air, warm and fragile and heavier than anything Arthur Sterling had ever been given. He couldn't speak. He reached for her, pulling her gently into his arms. She came willingly, folding into his chest like she had always belonged there, her small arms wrapping around his neck. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden light through the window. Inside, two hearts beat quietly, no longer alone. For the first time in a long, long while, they were a family, and neither of them ever was alone again. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.